oddly, one of the things that can keep us from getting in a better spot in our business is the comfort of the way our business currently is. Focus on making your core business, the one thing that you offer, focus on making that work first. Do good work and also make yourself visible. Hello, Architect Nation, and welcome back to the Business of Architecture podcast, where we talk about strategies to help you grow and run a more impactful, fulfilling, and financially rewarding small architectural practice. Today, I'm joined by my co-host, Ryan Willard. Welcome to the podcast today.
Thank you, sir. Always a pleasure to spend this time with you talking about the thing we love the most, which is running an architecture practice.
Absolutely. And not just running one, but actually running one in a way that brings you freedom, fulfillment, and exceptional financial reward.
Running it in a way that unleashes your deepest levels of vitality, fulfillment, and purpose, has you loving architecture again.
We also want to acknowledge the sponsors of today's episode.
Accurate data is crucial, especially in today's business environment. Outdated and inaccurate data leads to turnarounds, delays, and rising costs. With supply chain and staffing issues, these costs and delays can multiply. That's why having a resource like AutoCAD is so important. AutoCAD works with building product manufacturers to keep their data up to date and accurate, and offers it to you easily accessible and free. Use AutoCAD's powerful search engine to find what you need and download right there on their site without needing to pay anything or even register. So try arcat.com today. That's ARCAT, ARCAT.com.
We are looking for architect developer stories for the Business of Architecture podcast. So, are you an architect developer with valuable insights to share? We're always on the lookout for passionate voices in the industry to join us on the Business of Architecture podcast. If you're ready to share your journey, lessons, strategies with our global audience, we'd love to hear from you. Reach out to us to explore being a guest on our show and help inspire other architect developers on their path. We'd be interested in hearing your story, whether you're at the very beginning of your development story or whether you have $100 million portfolio of projects already in the bag completed. We'd like to hear from you if you're working with the developers or that you've developed a number of small houses or you're working at a larger scale.
So Ryan, today we are having a question and answer session. We have some questions that were sent in by some of our fantastic listeners. And so we're just going to take these from the top based upon some of the order that they came in. The first question, Ryan, do you have that one there?
I do, yeah. Shall I read it out?
What do we have?
Shall I read the name of the person out?
Certainly.
Gabriel from Sevilla in Spain. Very beautiful town, city in Andalusia there. And Gabriel's question is, where would you start managing the finances in a small architecture firm? Say the starting point is, I have an Excel file with 2 tabs, income, expenses, and there are a list of invoices each. What would be the first step for improvement? Now, I think looking at these questions, we're going to take an approach of answering them kind of literally, like what the question's asked for. And my suspicion, having spoken to lots of architects in the past, about their businesses, is that often the question that's being asked isn't the real question that's actually being asked. Okay, and often there's other things. So if, for example, if somebody's here asking how to manage the finances in a small architecture firm, my first question would be, why, or what is it that's having you ask that question? What's happening with the finances in your firm that's making you want to improve your management? And my suspicion is, certainly for a small practice, is that the finances probably aren't that good. And actually, a better question is, or this question might be, there's a pain here of like something financially is not working. Okay, so the kind of logical thing is to go, okay, how do I manage my finances better?
And my suspicion is that there probably isn't enough finances in there to be managed properly in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
I might be wrong.
Exactly.
I might be completely wrong. But that is a suspicion. And so that would be the other kind of direction of answering this question, would be about, is there enough finances in the business at the moment? Because if there isn't, then your income, your two Excel files, your Excel file with the two tabs, income and expenses, that's great. Okay. Just keep listing it out. You got it there. But your main priority needs to be winning work and bringing in more projects so that you can have money to manage.
Beautiful, Ryan. And this is where our blind spots can sabotage us, and actually the solutions that we think are solutions can actually steer us in the wrong direction. So for instance, if it's logical, so when we have a problem in our business, architectural practice, like say for instance, we don't have enough money, how do we experience that? There's probably some experience that we're experiencing that's telling us we don't have enough money. Because people can tolerate looking at the bank account and seeing it at $20 year after year after year, month after month after month, no problem. So it's usually not a matter of like not having money in the bank account. Usually there's some catalyst. It's like a bill comes in and oops, the account gets overdrawn, or oops, there's no money to pay for that. Or, I have to pay my consultants, and because I paid my consultants this month, oh, there's no money for me to take out for my salary. And sometimes that's not even a problem. But then suddenly when I don't take out money for myself, then let's say, for instance, I have to forego some sort of personal thing. Like maybe I wanted to go out to eat this weekend, but now I'm worried about how much I would spend on that experience. And so I'm holding back. So there's always usually the lived experience that causes us to recognize that our business isn't performing the way that it could be performing. Now, once we recognize that, so we're going to be some trigger, some catalyst that brings that into our awareness. And what happens is our mind, which is a computing machine, the mind is basically a machine. It's a biological machine that is always looking to close loops. In other words, to find solutions. It's looking to solve equations. And so the mind, if you're not careful, the mind will give you and steer you completely wrong by giving you the wrong question to even ask. So for instance, let's say that, now this may not be happening at all with this question, but I think it's a great opportunity to talk about what really is at the stem, at the root cause of a lot of the unpleasant experiences that we have when we are business owners. Because we'll have something like a catalyst where we have some pain around our business, something's unsavory, something that we don't enjoy is happening to us. Usually it's around lack of money. And so then our mind automatically goes on like this little computer trying to figure out, okay, how can I solve this problem? However, one of the problems with this is that we're not looking at the problem from a completely objective and unbiased perspective. Because the non-conscious mind, which is the body programming, comes into this as well. So we need to understand, as our mind is looking for a solution, the mind is looking for a solution from the frame of an architect. Meaning that you have the preferences of an architect, you have the desires of an architect, you have the way of understanding the world as an architect, you have the way of your awareness of the things that you notice as an architect. Now, one of the things that we know, Ryan and I both having backgrounds in architecture, being architects, at least for me, what I found is that as an architect, I had a disdain for anything that included putting myself out there, selling, getting in front of the marketplace, talking to clients, discussing money, and the long list goes on and on and on and on. And so what happens in our mind is also influenced by our emotions. So instead of steering us to the correct sort of question to investigate, the mind steers us to the easiest thing that we think will solve the problem, when in reality, oftentimes it has nothing whatsoever to do with reality. So it's not uncommon for small architectural practices to be experiencing scarcity in money, and then to attribute it to all sorts of reasons as to why this is happening. And if Ryan and we are going to take the liberty to read into this question here. But the question is, how do I better manage my finances? I would say, well, likely if you're like 90%, 99% of the small practices that we talk to and that we work with and that we know about, the problem is not managing your finances. That's not, you can sit there in front of the computer screen for another 10 hours a week, managing and getting the best software to be able to manage your finances. Likely the problem is there's not enough finances there to manage. That's the problem you need to solve.
It's interesting. I remember years ago when I first started running a practice, and both my parents are accountants, and I was talking to my dad about, accounting systems for a firm, and he just goes, "It's not complicated. You need one column that says in and another column that says out, and make sure that what comes in is less than what goes out."
There you
And
go.
I was,
So that's our simple answer. That's our simple answer. That is our
and that,
simple answer to a very good question.
but it's interesting, and so the first step for improvement would be making sure that you've got more money coming in than you've got going out. Okay, and you can tell, and so with the system you've got here already, with these two columns, you're already doing that. So great, and that's my next question: is what's coming in less than what's going out, and can you live off it? Is it fulfilling all of your needs? And because if it's not, then the place to looking is winning work, winning work, winning work, winning work, winning work. And winning work is not purely, this is the other kind of architectural myth, is that winning work is not purely a function of just doing good work. So that's the other thing that we come up a lot, is that we've, as architects, we've often been trained to have this disdain, disgust, rejection of anything salesy or marketing, or we don't appreciate the kind of depth of that topic. So we don't think that that's a problem and not something that we should be doing. But my work is good, so if I just carry on doing the good work, then the business will come at some point. And in the meantime, I'm going to focus on managing my finances better, because that's logical. Because, as you're saying, you've got these kind of experiences which are uncomfortable. I ran out of money. I couldn't go to the cinema. We had to I'm feeling some kind of experience of constraint. So it must be the way that I'm managing my money.
Absolutely. And it's interesting. Oddly, one of the things that can keep us from getting in a better spot in our business is the comfort of the way our business currently is. So for instance, when we see architectural practices that have very low income, very low profit, it's not uncommon to have the owners be experiencing not a whole lot of pain around that, discomfort around that. They may be in a dual income family. They may be able to rely upon a partner's income, and so it's not a necessity for them to bring home money out of the practice. Oftentimes, they may have very low living expenses, and so because of the low living expenses, they believe, hey, look, if I'm pulling in $4,000 a month, then yippee-ki-yay, this is a great business, I'm doing well. So oftentimes we measure the success of our business based upon our expenses. But this is an employee mentality. It's like an employee comes to you and says, hey, I want a raise because I moved into a new apartment, or hey, can I have a raise because we just had a baby? Your employer, is thrilled that you had a baby, but in terms of paying you more money, the employer doesn't care if you live in the Ritz-Carlton every single day and you have the maids come in and change your sheets and you're paying $1,500 a night per room, or if you're living out of your car, as long as you shower and come in and look very orderly in your appearance. So the same thing, we can often get into the same trap with our business as well. Is we can think that our business needs to perform to a certain rate that matches our business. And to a certain degree, that's true, because ultimately we're the ones that decide how we run our business. We're the ones who decide how profitable we want it to be. But oftentimes we end up shortchanging ourselves and performing at a much lower level because we're not open to the possibility of what our business could actually become because of our own limited frame and our own limited experience.
If we wanted to give a literal answer for what would be the first step for improvement, firstly, I would say find out a little bit more about the Smart Practice program that we run here at Business of Architecture, because we have loads of different strategies inside of that, which help build out the financial foundations of a practice. And possibly one component of that, which is very easy for people to get started with, is profit first. You've heard Enoch and I talk about it many times on the podcast. But our suspicion here is that this question is coming from a different place.
Indeed. And Gabriel, the other thing here is, in your question, you say that you have an Excel file with 2 tabs, income and expenses, and there are a list of invoices each. So what I would, based upon that makes it sound like...
one tab.
We'll put them in one tab, is right. But also it makes it sound like you're running on what we would call accrual accounting, which basically means that you're just counting the invoices. So the difference between accrual and cash accounting is beyond the scope of this podcast. But accrual is where you do exactly that. You take a list of your bills, basically, I'm going to simplify it here, and a list of your invoices, and then you use that to determine the profitability of your business. But that can be problematic for a small practice because it might not match up with the actual cash. The alternative is, instead of keeping track of on your list, instead of keeping track of the invoices and the bills, keep track of the actual money that was paid out and the actual money that was paid in. So that's a cash management system. So, Gabriel, we hope that helps you as you move forward in your practice and understanding the role of financial management and how that impacts your ability to have more agency as an architect and designer.
Wonderful. Let's look at the next question from Lisa in Calgary, Alberta. Where's Calgary, Alberta? Is that Canada?
It is indeed Canada. It's basically directly above. I mean, you look at Idaho, Montana. It's just to the north. Alberta is a very large,
very beautiful
province in Canada. And Calgary is, of course, probably, I would imagine, the largest city in Alberta. And of course, it was also the home of the Winter Olympics at least once.
So the question, and again, we're going to probably take a similar approach here, because already you can see it's kind of loaded with, my instinct is, why are you asking this question? Okay, so the question is it worth it for a small practitioner to get into energy modeling? And if so, what program do you recommend? What about life cycle assessment? If you already use AutoCAD and SketchUp, what would be a complementary program if you are doing primarily residential work? Is Revit worth the investment, or would you recommend Rhino and Enscape? What is the best way to make your practice distinct if you have lead but are not getting the clients that want to certify? Okay, that's interesting. Lastly, how old is too old to go back to school to get a specialty?
It's a lot there.
There is a lot.
So again, what I hear in this question is I hear the surface level questions of the very tactical, should I do this, should I do that? But my mind is asking me, what's the core issue or problem that is causing these questions to be asked? Because here's one of the challenges that we can face in a business. So we'll answer this again in both ways. Let's give the straight answers first, Ryan. Let's just pretend like there's no deeper question here. There's no better way of doing things. Let's just answer the questions that were asked. Is energy modeling, what does it say? Is it worth it for a small practitioner to get into energy modeling? Okay, so we'll take that first question. The answer is it depends.
Yeah, it could be.
Because if you're already running $1 million business as a sole practitioner, you're doing very high-end architecture, people pay you handsomely for the work that you do, and you have 8 weeks of vacation every single year to exotic locations around the world, then why would you want to get into energy modeling? Right? And probably just stick with your current business. If, on the other hand, you are barely scraping by with the current services that you're offering, and you're finding exceedingly difficult to sell the current service that you're selling, then it may be worthwhile looking into something that may have a higher demand in your market.
We've seen practices do energy modeling, usually when they already have the skills. Okay, so it's not like they're not spending a load of time retooling up and training for 6 months to a year to learn how to do energy modeling. But we often see practices, young practices, when they first start up, doing a bit of energy modeling because it's a quick additional service that they can do to support the architecture practice as the architecture practice is beginning to grow. And so in that context, fine, it can work easy. Perhaps you've had perhaps it's an individual and they've been doing energy modeling at a past business, and they can outsource their services now to their last employer and do a bit of energy modeling, and it brings in some consistent cash flow. Fine, great. But as a new business model, not sure. Energy modeling, there are businesses that do just purely energy modeling. It can as well be a good, a good kind of supplementary service to an architecture firm, like as part of your residential design. But again, you've got to weigh up the energy and the time that is needed to learn those skills, and do you have them already in house? So there's
Exactly.
there's
Again, the challenge here is that it's not uncommon for a business owner to look for greener pastures because the main thing isn't working as well as they would like. So actually, I have a good friend once who was speaking to a very successful real estate agent who had been as at the end of his career. So if you could imagine these two people, they're on this boat hanging out, a nice evening cruise, and this young entrepreneur is talking to this older, more established businessman and asks, hey, right now I'm in the carpet cleaning business. I'm curious, how could I start making money in real estate? And this wise older gentleman said something very poignant. He said, here's the problem. If you jump from carpet cleaning into real estate, you're going to bring the very same problems that you're having right now in carpet cleaning over into real estate. He says, what you need to do is fix the problems, make that carpet cleaning business work first, and then you can think you can jump over into real estate. Because here's the thing, people make money in all kinds of businesses. People have creative enjoyment in all kinds of businesses. So the challenge is that our architectural practice isn't working. We want to jump over into something else. And so we take the leadership problems, we take the management problems, we take the cash management problems, we take the financial issues over into the new venture. So the advice is, if that's the case, focus on making your core business, the one thing that you offer, focus on making that work first. Make that profitable, make that highly profitable, get really good at doing that. And then once you've maximized that particular offering, whatever it is that you're offering, when I say maximized, I mean, you're making a healthy income from that. You have free time. Your business is serving you in your ability to be flexible in your schedule. You're doing rewarding work for rewarding clients. When you get to that point, now it's time, okay, cool, let's start looking at another service offering. Unless you want to, unless you're passionate about something like energy modeling and you hate architecture, well, in that case, start up a business around energy modeling.
Great. So the next part here about what about life cycle assessment? What is life cycle? Is that a program, or is that referring to?
Let me see exactly what about life cycle assessment? I mean, look, life cycle assessment generally refers to like a cost benefit analysis over time of a building. That's my understanding. I'm not an expert in life cycle assessment. So it's an additional service typically for larger projects where they're looking at how certain design decisions or certain things will impact
so kind of like
the life of the project.
So post-occupancy.
Similar to that. Yeah.
Sort of thing. And then, okay.
Maybe there's some expert listening right now. It's like, that's not at all what life cycle assessment is, but this is the Business of Architecture podcast, not the life cycle assessment podcast. So,
it's the same sort of thing.
Ryan and I, we don't really even know what life cycle assessment is. When I was practicing as an architect, we never actually did that. So the question is, could that be a good thing? Absolutely. Could be a great business.
It's the same, but in the same context as answering the last question.
Exactly.
All right.
Next question, Ryan, that kind of part of this question, if you already use AutoCAD and SketchUp, what would be a complementary program if you're doing primarily residential work, I would say don't use a complementary program. Just if you're using AutoCAD and SketchUp and it's working for you, just keep on doing that.
Yeah. I mean, this is another thing that a lot of people waste a lot of time in is, thinking about a new software or moving over or transitioning, and then they make all the money, then they make all the expenditure into Revit, and it doesn't work for them.
New software ain't going to solve your problems. I can tell you that for sure.
It's just
like you get divorced. Now, apologies to those who've gotten divorced and you found your dream companion, but my experience, according to my marriage therapist, you take the same person with you into the new marriage. Same thing applies with business, right? So if you're going to take the same issues, no matter what program you use Revit, use AutoCAD, either of these can work for residential. And you can use Vectorworks, you can use ArchiCAD, you can use...
I have a personal preference of CAD software, right? Of using Vectorworks. I love Vectorworks. I think it's a great bit of kit. I think you can draw 2D in it, you can draw 3D in it, you can replace AutoCAD and SketchUp. And we had a client a little while ago, and they were looking at their workflow, and they were using AutoCAD and SketchUp, this kind of thing. And they went through about a 6-month process of looking at other bits of software. They eventually went on to, I think they might have even started on Vectorworks. And you know what? It wasn't a fit. They didn't like it. And they just went back to AutoCAD and SketchUp. And again, the kind of the underlying root causes of what was causing the experience of constraint or something not working wasn't the software. It was fees. We weren't charging enough.
Mm-hmm. Let's kind of walk our listeners through how that might work. Like, in other words, what is that? Why did they come to that conclusion?
So the experience they were having was one of overwhelm, was of not having enough time, and clearly I need to be more efficient with the execution of the projects that we're doing. But they were pretty good with AutoCAD and SketchUp, right? Yeah, they could invest a bit of money and learn how to use both of those programs even better. Great. They could learn how to use SketchUp in 2D even better than they could. But the experience that they were having, the problem was one of overwhelm, one of not having enough time, one of feeling compressed, which was as a result of a poor negotiation with not negotiating enough fees to have enough resource or enough people on the project, and not negotiating enough time on the project. So it's a sales problem. And the feeling of constraint of not having enough money, that was what was causing the...
Well, it goes back to the saying, if you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail, right? So we see this a lot with small architectural practices. A lot of times that the way you as a practitioner will try to solve your constraints in your business is through architecture itself. In other words, like this question, well, I'm having some constraints. We're going to assume there's some constraints happening. Otherwise, why does this person want to potentially look at what is Liza, who's obviously a very smart and intelligent listener, being a podcast listener of the Business of Architecture podcast already, we know a couple things about Liza, being highly intelligent, sophisticated, to listen to such a important couple of paragons of the architectural
already
industry.
Making good life choices.
They have very good life choices.
With time allocation.
Exactly. So, and then the question is, okay, well, obviously there's some constraint happening here. And as an architect or designer, we look for solutions based upon what we know. And so what we know is how to use design software and how to do architecture and how to turn out projects more efficiently. And so we're always looking in that direction. That's typically the way that we find that architects try to solve constraints in their business, is by improving their architectural processes, getting some new software that helps them do what they do a little bit better. All of these things, however, can be moving the dial 1% or 0.5%. And that's a very long road. It can be very exhausting when there's much larger levers that we can actually turn on the apparatus to make life a whole lot easier, a whole lot more quickly. And one of these, Ryan said, is simply learning how to negotiate better, demanding higher fees for our work.
So the next kind of part of this question is Revit worth the investment, or would you recommend Rhino and Enscape? It kind of, again, it kind of falls
Yes,
into
Revit's worth the investment.
it falls into the same family. Rhino, Enscape can be amazing as well. We've had Jonathan Reeves on the show talking about it before. This next part though does make me think. There's a sales problem, because it asks, what is the best way to make your practice distinct if you have lead, but you are not getting clients that want to certify?
There we go. Now we're starting to uncover a more systematic problem that may be happening, which is very common to most small practices. So what do you do? What is the best way to make your practice distinct? Okay, if you have lead but are not getting clients that want to certify. All right, so if you're not getting clients who want to certify, this is what we would call a marketing problem, right? Anything regarding the quality of clients you're getting, the number of clients you're getting, any of these relate to the visibility or lack thereof in the marketplace. So the solution to be making your practice distinct in that area is to invest in marketing your practice. Now that could be through a marketing coach that teaches you how to market, so you do the marketing yourself. It could be by hiring an established marketing agency that has results in this area. However, what we find generally works for small practices is to get out there and start making connections, simply following a very simple framework of identifying who are these people who would like to and be happy to certify their projects in lead, to be able to pay the money to get their product certified, find out who those corporations, companies, clients are, and then go out there and talk to them and let them know that you have a service that you're offering that solves that particular problem, and do that repeatedly over time. And then if that's not working, then we begin to look at your ability to determine a fit, which that falls into the sales camp.
When you've got a solution, right? So lead is a kind of specialty or an energy performance type of specialism, or an ability to certify buildings with it. You've got this solution, but often what we end up doing is trying to sell all the benefits of this solution, or like to sell the technical parts of the solution and how good it is, but we've never taken any time to fit it to what a client is actually dealing with. Like, what's the problem of the client? Like, what's the problem that lead could be solving for a client? And often when I see this is that architects will, and this is quite understandable, they'll position the lead, this type of thing, this kind of a sustainability accreditation, to solving a problem that the client doesn't know that they have. Now that's difficult with marketing. Okay, so if you're starting to solve problems people don't know that they have, then they're not really going to be that motivated to solve the problem. So part of this conversation is having a better understanding of what your clients are dealing with, and what are the sorts of things that lead actually solves for a client, that a client is got a problem with now that they're actively talking about. Right, so maybe it's kind of high heating bills, for example, or maybe it's clients who have had, they've been really hammered in the press for poor publicity because they've had unsustainable practices, or they've been dumping toxic waste into the local river or something, and they've got a bad PR around them, right? So that would be like an active problem that a client might be dealing with. Maybe there's business and operational or performance things for a commercial building, okay, that lead, because lead includes things like well-being, I assume, as well, right? And part of their sustainability.
No, I went through the process. I don't know, Ryan, if it now includes well-being. It's been, since I was certified in lead, there have been some iterations around the way that the ratings work. So I'm not sure.
Right. So again, it's kind of starting to understand what are the current business problems of the client now that are much more present, that are irritating the client right now that they're talking about and that they're actively trying to find solutions for. So just knowing what those are, then you're much more likely to be able to find a way of kind of presenting lead as a solution to those problems. Rather than just trying to, here's what, lead solves the problem of you not being lead accredited. Well, that's not the problem. I'm being silly, but that's often how we end up approaching it.
Yeah,
right? Because
absolutely.
these are not problems that the client knows that they've got.
The last question there as part of this multi-pronged question is, when is it too late to go back for additional certification or education? Never too late.
It's never too late. It's just why you're doing it.
Yep. And however, I think there's a very clear distinction here. There's a distinction between education and certification. So, for instance, Smart Practice, which is the program that we run here at Business of Architecture, is highly applicable and highly valuable on very specific strategies for making your business run very well and very profitably and very sustainably and in a very fulfilling way. However, you won't get a certification other than us telling you you are now Smart Practice certified, which in the marketplace, unfortunately, right now doesn't mean a whole lot, because
one day,
eventually it will. One day, all clients will be clamoring for Smart Practice certified firms, right? Now, on the other hand, you have something that, a lot of these educational organizations or institutions offer. They can give you certifications. They can certify you in certain things, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you will necessarily be able to build a business out of that. And this is, again, one of the conundrums of the professionals. So there's no time. It's never too old to go back to school and get a specialty. Never. However, let's just make sure that we're not doing that to try to compensate for the lack of our skills in some area, particularly perhaps marketing, selling, presenting those services, because we can have a specialty, but in architecture, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be easier to make a livable wage with that specialty. It could. Maybe there's a specialty out there where it's so hot in demand that marketing is superfluous in any economy, and you just put up your shingle and you're the best thing since sliced bread. That may be the case. And I salute everyone who continues to invest in themselves through education. What we would say is, I'd almost say the reverse is true, is like, you should be seriously concerned if you're not involved in consistent and constant self-education.
Yeah.
You're never so young. You're never so young, or you're never so old that you don't need continuous education. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. And I think it's, again, knowing where is this question coming from? Because if this question is about my current financial situation is not satisfactory, so I'm now thinking about tooling up to make more money, then I would ask the question, what are the best tools or skills that I could learn to make me more money? What are the most high income skills that I could learn? Okay, that's a more useful question. And the jury's out on a lot of these specialties, okay, because you've still got to market and sell them. Okay, and unless, like Enoch says, there is something that's just in such hot demand, but then the likelihood of that is that those sorts of things are either incredibly difficult to get certified in, and that's why they're rare and in such hot demand. But there's not many of those. But there are income generating skills, business skills, which you can learn, that I'd probably advise to invest my money in first, and then it will only make any future investment in your architectural development more valuable.
Excellent. The next question, Ryan, comes from Scott, and Scott talks about owning and running an architectural practice and an interior design practice within that practice, and mentions that Scott is seeing that more projects are going to interior design firms and general contractors. And the question is, how do architects level the field? So we're going to kind of rephrase this question a little bit to say, when we say level the field, it sounds like you're saying, how do I get involved with these projects earlier and win more of these kind of projects? Unless you're saying literally, how do we make general contractors and interior designers win less, which is, I don't think that's the intent here. I don't think we need to make anyone win less. It sounds like you're probably wondering, how can I get exposed to more? And you mentioned Instagram being a marketing tool or avenue for your practice. So again, this goes back to one of the most underutilized and underinvested in skills that architects have, which is their ability for promotion and sales. One thing that we know, having worked with interior designers and knowing a lot of interior designers in the market, and even contractors sometimes, especially interior designers, usually they are actually pretty good at self-promotion. They're very good at marketing. It comes naturally to them. They enjoy it. They oftentimes are very good in working with people. And because of this, architects can oftentimes, it's not uncommon that we hear architects getting very frustrated when interior designers are being brought in as the leads on projects, whereas in the past, these type of projects would have been solicited from architects.
Yeah, that's an interesting one, that there's something about the kind of personality type that attracts interior designers and that attracts architects, if you like, that often architects are a little bit more introverted. Interior designers, they're more extroverted. They're often very good networkers. They're out there, they're talking, they're self-publicists. They know how to get themselves into magazines. They're good networkers. They're building relationships. And, you know, how many interior designers do we get approached on the podcast who have got their own TV show?
I mean, it seems
All
like
the
we get an
time.
inquiry a week. Yeah.
It's amazing. It's amazing, right? And you jump onto their website and you can see their podcasts and their content that they're producing, and they're good at it. And architects tend to be more on the, if we use something like the disc profile, more your S's and your C's, which is a more introverted, technical, process orientated type of personality. And also, I think in architecture, we're probably a little bit more suspicious of marketing and relationship building. And, you know, we're very aware of the dictums that we're brought up on in architecture, of just focus on doing great work. You know, that's a very introverted kind of person's way of looking at it. We've just focused on doing the great work, and then all of it will come to you.
Yeah. And it's that, I mean, that's very 1960s though.
Yeah,
I
it's
mean,
old
come on.
fashioned.
It's totally 1960s. Like in the 60s, when architects were making a transition, because when we look at the way that the architectural practice has evolved over time, you know, in the late 1800s, architects were only used on the very on civic buildings, institutional buildings, educational buildings, buildings that were complex and buildings that were large. And in the post-war boom of 1945, and particularly spearheaded by Frank Lloyd Wright, doing these very, you know, high-end homes for luxury clients, eventually, you know, as the middle class began to have demands for homes, the rise of professional class attorneys, accountants began to have more disposable income, there began to be a market for custom home design, and architects would then step into this role to fill this particular gap. And at the time, the supply of architects was much less than the demand for these services. And so, I mean, that's why I say it's 1960s. You could put up, you know, you could just do good work. That's the dictum. Hey, just do good work. Your name will spread. People will come to you, and happy days. But today, as Scott's pointing out, what we're finding is that there's so many marketing mediums right now. There's a lot of demand in the market. You know, architects are not new anymore. It's not novel to have an architect in town. You know, architects has been a profession, like I said, for over a century now. And because of that, there there is a lot of competition in the market. There's a lot of architects, and there's a lot of designers, and there's a lot of people who are contractors who are, peddling their ability to design projects as well. And so just doing good work, although it may have been very appropriate and good advice in the 60s, today the advice is a little bit different. Today the advice is a lot different. Today the advice is do good work and also make yourself visible.
Be proactive in your marketing efforts. And in terms of using social media, I would suggest, and this is what we recommend to our clients here, and it works with a lot of success, is start by developing some core proactive marketing approaches, which literally is very simple. It means being a hunter, being proactive, identifying the sorts of ideal target clients that you want, and also identifying clients that are going to make you money. Okay, so that's a kind of just a key step that often gets missed somewhere, right? Identify the kind of clients that you want to be approaching, whether it's in an industry or a certain demographic of people. If it's going to be like high net worth individuals, then you need to be able to have some tangibles of how to search for high net worth individual people, either by profession. So identify highly paid professions, doctors, lawyers, entrepreneurs. Okay. And then start building out a list of who these people are, where they are, and how you could approach them, which would be the next part. And you can approach them very simply. You can use LinkedIn. You can use social media to approach people directly. You can use the phone, which is probably the most underused, but one of the most successful things that we've found people using is picking up the phone and having a conversation with somebody. We do a thing called the dial-a-thon here at BOA, where once a month we have people build out a big list of either potential referral partners who could introduce them to the types of people that they want to meet, or they built out a list of decision makers in businesses they want to kind of speak with, have the list. Sometimes they go on to Upwork and, pay somebody $100 to build a list of all the sorts of CEOs in the San Francisco area, for example, for working at tech companies. They build the list, get phone numbers, get emails, and they sit there with the phones and they start dialing. And it's very funny because I remember we had somebody who had they'd spent 15, 20 grand on SEO optimization on their website, and they'd got a new lead generation person and they were paying a couple of grand too, and all this kind of stuff, and they hadn't generated any leads, and they'd never done any just direct outreach. And they jumped on on the call. They picked up the phone, went and phoned somebody, came back 15 minutes later. They were like, "Oh, I got a lead." I just spoke with somebody.
To spending $10,000,
I just spoke with somebody.
$20,000 on SEO,
So
just picking up the phone.
that
Got a lead.
direct approach is way more effective than people think it is. It takes a little something to do it, and there are strategies and scripts and ways that work better than others. Okay, but getting that as a discipline in your practice, proactively going out and finding people, and then there's the whole process of refining your offers and having little bits of marketing collateral. But those things support this kind of primary activity of direct approaching people that you want to work with. And then your social media and your website and that sort of stuff, then that can become a kind of support to this function. That's one strategy that I'd recommend. We do have other clients who have been very skilled and got in early with Instagram, for example. And the Instagram accounts that we tend to see do very well are with practices who are serving high net worth individuals, and they've already got a portfolio of beautifully photographed, fabulous houses, because that's your classic Pinterest coffee table book stuff. There's a lot of people who are like looking to bookmark those kinds of images. And so if you've got that kind of resource and that kind of portfolio, brilliant, because that makes good content for Instagram. But if you're, depending on where you are with your work and your practice, then the direct approach is very good, and then your social media strategies support that. And then you can, and if you're a new business and you haven't got much in terms of portfolio, then your content can be more value driven, more educational driven, more about answering questions of prospective clients and addressing their pains and problems.
Beautiful. Ryan, the next question comes from Danielle. Danielle asks, how important to your business is it to get published in architectural magazines?
We see this question a lot.
Yep.
It does come up a lot.
Well, it's a common one. It's a common one. And like the way we would look at answering this question is, you should have a formally developed and well thought out marketing plan for your architectural practice. And you should weigh the costs and the benefits of each particular marketing activity and channel. And one of these would be public relations or PR, which then goes into getting published in magazines. And it could be a very highly effective process for your practice to get published in magazines. However, it can also go horribly wrong, because just like the answer for, should you make a birthday cake for your child's birthday is yes, the recipe and what you put into that birthday cake are going to vary greatly and could turn it out to be a complete disaster or something that could be excellent. So unfortunately, I'm not sure the value of this answer that we're giving you here, Danielle, because yes, it can be highly effective to be published in certain magazines that are in front of certain clients. And yet it could also be very ineffective to spend money getting published in magazines. What I will tell you is that for companies that succeed and they have an active PR campaign, they're getting published in many magazines again and again and again and again. And it's this consistent effort over 1, 2, or 3 years that begins to see results for them in their practice. Typically, if a practice, there's probably architects right now who are listening who have said, well, I got one of my projects published and the phone didn't ring at all. That's not uncommon. It's not uncommon at all to have a project published and not to get any work from it. So as with any marketing activity, the real benefit comes from the repeated consistency of that particular action. And that, without having more, knowing more about your practice, that would be the sagest advice that we could offer.
Yep. A long-term approach. If you're a small practice looking to get published as well, there's plenty of resources online. There's plenty of podcasts we've done where we've spoken to PR agents about the process and how you can do bits of it yourself. But it does need to be part of a longer, well thought out marketing strategy, because it can be an expensive endeavor that doesn't pay off. So we've got an anonymous one here. This will be the last question that we do today. Little background. It says, I co-founded my practice with a partner and I'm the majority owner. As I'm the only registered architect, my partner, while experienced, is not registered. I handle all the administrative responsibilities, including bookkeeping, project management, invoicing, legal and corporate requirements, proposals and contracts. Additionally, I contribute significantly to project work, designing and drafting, putting in nearly as many hours on project as my partner, who primarily focuses on project work with minimal additional contributions. His additional contributions have been building, updating the website and tech, such as maintaining the server and troubleshooting problems. However, this has been minimal as we are a practice of 2 people. Over the past 4 years, I've consistently worked 200 to 300 more hours annually than he has. Our 2-person firm has been slow to grow, and we've paid ourselves in the form of dividends rather than salaries. However, we've now reached a revenue threshold where getting salaries makes sense. I'd like to structure compensation to reflect my additional responsibilities, liability, and the greater hours I contribute given my role both as director and architect. My question, Could you advise on how to determine fair salaries based on reasonable percentage in responsibility, liability, and workload? I find it difficult to justify sharing dividends based on our ownership percentage, which is nearly equal under the current circumstances. Thank
My
you again.
advice, get out of the relationship while you still can. I feel like one of the commenters on Reddit, where like someone asks a question and then someone comes back with an answer that's completely different than what they asked.
There's quite a bit to unpack here. There's a relationship here to maintain as well, and this is one of the kind of challenges of working together. The ownership percentage that does justify a kind of profit share, because that's the sort of mechanism at play. But then the actual salaries can be different, because you've got, and it would need a little bit of a kind of articulating what the roles are of each individual. And I mean, you could just do it. I mean, if you're just doing it based on an hourly rate of both of you, then there's 200.
Yeah, and I think this
200 hours.
person's saying that they're finding they work 200 to 300 hours more annually than
Yeah.
they do. So the simplest thing would just be multiply that by whatever the person's earning on an hourly rate and say, hey, I want to get compensated for the additional time I put into the business. Is that fair?
Yeah.
And if
And
the
then-
person says, no, it's not fair, you might
got
have a
a
conversation.
negotiation.
Yeah, there you go.
But yeah, but making sure that you both establish what your salaries are, and have that as different to being your, what the profit share is going to be. The profit share is going to, like, if they're both equal owners of the profit share, I mean, be equal owners of the business, and the profit share is going to be distributed according to the ownership percentages. But how much profit there is can be determined by the salaries, which can be different. And you've already got a mechanism there of just justifying, well, I'm doing 200 to 300 more hours annually. Then that's a first starting point. And you're the only registered architect. And well, the other thing is, I'm assuming, is this a married couple?
It doesn't say anything about that.
Okay, in my mind I was thinking, well, then if it's just purely a business partner, then you guys have got to sit down and make your case and say, here's all my roles and responsibilities in the business. Here's what you're doing. You can also, as a bit of kind of data, you can look at something like the AIA compensation charts, and just kind of show what roles are, what the kind of median salary is of certain roles. And if you're wearing more than one hat, and you can kind of and you've got a way of breaking down what tasks your hours, or what role your hours have been associated with, there's kind of, there's a mechanism there. And again, make the case of like, well, then you're the one with the registration. Are both of you paying for the insurance?
And yeah, and here's the other thing that here's the important principle that our listeners can take away from this is oftentimes we're looking for a very specific framework or way to determine how much we should charge, to determine how much we should pay an employee, to determine what the salary should be in a practice, to determine how we should split profits with the partner that we have. What we don't realize is that all of these things are much more open to negotiation than we think. It's not so much about using some standardized measuring stick for what these things are. That can be a good starting point, but it's much more about, do both parties feel like they're winning in the agreement? And so if you use that as your principle, if you go into this conversation saying, okay, how can we both walk away from this experience like we're both winning? That will be the principle that will allow you to have the best possible chance of a positive outcome. And with that, Ryan, we've come to the end of our questions. If you have any questions that you'd like us to address here on Business of Architecture on the podcast, please send them in to support@businessofarchitecture.com. And a special request from Ryan and I, along with the question that you ask, please also tell us why you're asking this particular question. Thank you. That is a wrap. Hey, Enoch Sears here, and I have a request since you are a listener here of the Business of Architecture podcast. Ryan and I, we love putting this podcast together. We love sharing information as much as we can glean from all the other industries that we're a part of to bring it back to empower you as an architect and a designer. And one thing that helps us in our mission is the growth of this podcast, simply because it helps other architects stand for more of their value, spreads the business information that we're sharing to empower architects together so architects, designers, engineers can really step into their greatness, whatever that looks like for each individual. And so here my simple ask is for you to join us and be part of our community by doing the following: heading over to iTunes and leaving a review of the podcast. And as an expression of our sincere thanks, we would like to give you a free CEU course that can get you one professional development unit, but more importantly, we'll give you a very solid and firm foundation on your journey to becoming a profitable and thriving architect. So here's the process for that. After you leave us a review, send an email to support@businessofarchitecture.com. Let us know the username that you use to leave the review, and we will send you that free training. On the training, you'll discover what 99% of architecture firm owners wish they would have known 20 years ago.
And now a short message from our sponsor. Accurate data is crucial, especially in today's business environment. Outdated and inaccurate data leads to turnarounds, delays, and rising costs. With supply chain and staffing issues, these costs and delays can multiply. That's why having a resource like AutoCAD is so important. AutoCAD works with building product manufacturers to keep their data up to date and accurate, and offers it to you easily, accessible, and free. Use AutoCAD's powerful search engine to find what you need and download right there on their site without needing to pay anything or even register. So try arcat.com today. That's ARCAT, ARCAT.com.
The views expressed on the show by my guests do not represent those of the host, and I make no representation, promise, guarantee, pledge, warranty, contract, bond, or commitment except to help you conquer the world. Carpe diem.